I missed a step.
Yay.
Okay. Operator error. My goodness. And all of the, I know I'm live now. All of the bad talking that I've been doing about my local cable provider, and I failed to push the start button on the stream. Sherry, don't tell Dave this.
That's all he does, right? That's probably all he does.
Well, but he evidently, hello, shalom and welcome to Beginning Biblical Hebrew. I am embarrassed to say that there is a button that says Start Stream, and I didn't have a note that said don't forget to push the button. Dave is not here, obviously, so disregard this, and let's just say sorry and begin again. So shalom and welcome to Beginning Biblical Hebrew. You are now in Class 4. I'm Ross Nichols, and I am glad to be here with you today in our ongoing series on an introduction to Biblical Hebrew, where over the course of 5 weeks, I hope to provide the basic tools being those which will enable you to read Biblical Hebrew. All classes are posted on our website, unitedisrael.org, as well as links to these classes, on our social media sites. Now, I see that some are saying that they don't have sound, and one person is saying that we do, so I'm going to go to say that it's not on our end. You might have to adjust accordingly on your end. So, here's something that I wanted to start with. If you're here tonight, then you've not given up on me, but even more importantly, you've not given up on on yourself. And so it's good to know that that you are there. Let's see. Okay, so we do have sound. If you don't have sound, you can't hear me say to restart or refresh, but maybe someone else will let them know that. Okay.
And I just told them to check, make sure the sound icon isn't X'd out on the screen.
That's right. That's right.
That would,
So there are various things that you can check on your end. So I apologize again for that. But each week I'm presenting new material building on previous lessons. So you have to go back if you're joining us for the first time tonight, even though these lessons are somewhat standalone. In other words, you can listen to them independently and not necessarily consecutively. My concern is that if you've not taken the first 3 courses, I might cover something in this 4th lesson that you've not heard yet, and so it would be a little bit difficult to follow. I did want to say, before I get into the material tonight, once again, thanks go to my friend Kevin Brown, who has produced for us more teaching aids that are necessary for these classes. I could use a dry erase marker to illustrate some of the things that I want to cover, but because Kevin has put these together for us, it makes it much more instructive and much better in terms of the material presentation. So, thank you very much to Kevin. Last week, I ended the class by introducing to you the subject of Shavah, which is represented by this symbol here, okay? We're going to talk a little bit more about that today. We're going to build on that because it falls under the subject heading of half vowels. You'll recall that we produced and published on our website this particular chart that's pretty and colorful, and it's called the Hebrew Vowel Sounds. This does not cover half vowels, but more accurately, this is a full vowel sound chart. But tonight we're going to get into a little bit more about half vowels. But first, I wanted to cover the concept of syllables. We had to cover some other things first, as fundamental and foundational, and now we can get into syllables. So understand, and you can take notes as we work along, there are two types of syllables in the Hebrew language, and these are described as open and closed. Open and closed. An open syllable consists of a consonant and a vowel. I'm going to illustrate this for you and describe what I have behind me on the board to make this point really sink in, because I remember as I was studying biblical Hebrew for the first time, and I would read this and someone would do their very best to make it clear in words, it was sort of hard for me to grasp until I worked through several different approaches, all of which I've incorporated into tonight's teaching, and I'll illustrate these on the board for you. So an open syllable consists of a consonant and a vowel. A closed syllable has a consonant opening up the syllable. It has a vowel, and it has a consonant which closes the syllable. So the way that we would describe this, if you look at my board here, we have an open syllable has consonant vowel, illustrated here by CV, and a closed syllable has consonant vowel consonant. Okay? So the rule would be is that every syllable will have a consonant and a vowel at the least. An open syllable only has a consonant and a vowel. A closed syllable, consonant, vowel, consonant. Okay? So if we look at our word here, I'm going to create a little bit of space. This word that I'm using as my illustrative point is the word in Hebrew, Adam. Adam. You'll see here we have a consonant and a vowel, ah. Remember, the consonant, aleph, doesn't have an assigned vocalic power in and of itself, but when the vowel is attached to it, and you can look at your chart and see that this is the chametz, okay? So it takes that vowel sound, so this is an open syllable, right? Because it has a consonant and a vowel. And I'm just going to create a little bit of space here so that you can see the second syllable, which is a closed syllable, and it has a consonant, a vowel, and a consonant closing it out. So you have dam, dam, two syllables. Now I'm going to break some of this down for you so that it makes sense, because these concepts, we build on them as we go. So here we have a two-syllable word, Adam, and it consists of an open and a closed syllable. Now, in English, if I write the word, remember now, transliteration is when I take a word that's in one language and I represent that word in the letters or characters of another language. So if I want to use this word as my example, I would write it A-D-A-M, Adam, okay? Notice in English, the first syllable begins with a vowel, but in Hebrew, now, we're not talking about exceptions, which could possibly be exceptions, but are explained in other grammars as not even exceptions. Think of it this way for the time being. A syllable must begin with a consonant, okay? So you would question, how do I know how to break down the word Adam? See, in English it begins with a vowel, but I've told you that technically it begins with the consonant aleph. It has the vowel sound here assigned by the comets, so it's a-dam. Now, how do I know that we divide it between the a and the dam, right? In other words, could the word be ad-am? Well, based on what I've just told you, that we have to begin with a consonant followed by a vowel. If I did it like this, and this is not grammatically possible, but just to illustrate it, if I said odd, that's not possible, okay? Because you can't begin with the vowel sound. Now, I know some who might be a little further along in Hebrew are saying, well, what about this? What about that? Stick with me because we can get to that later. So technically and properly, biblically, we're going to divide the word here. Adam, each syllable begins with a consonant. It has a vowel sound. Notice consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant. Right? So in Hebrew, we read right to left, but we're constantly looking down and above for the associated vowel sounds. I hope that makes sense. Okay, now, we're going to talk a little bit about, although this is important and we'll do much more of this in coming weeks, I want you to get the idea of this, and then we're going to add something to it already. So hopefully you've got the basics of this. Now we're going to talk about accents, not like a southern accent like I have. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is a stress and what particular syllable receives stress, because we're going to build on this. In other words, do you say Adam or do you say Adam with the stress on the second syllable? All this becomes very important as we work through. So I want to talk a little bit about accents, and I want to start by telling you that Hebrew accents have three main purposes. Purpose number one is to mark the tone syllable. In other words, to mark the syllable upon which stress is applied in pronunciation. So it helps us put the correct stress on the correct syllable, if that makes sense. Number two, it helps us to regulate or determine the chanting of biblical text. So the second reason, not necessarily in order, is to determine the proper chanting of the Hebrew text. If you've ever been to a synagogue service, you know that there is a certain cantillation, there is a certain chanting that is assigned to the text. These indications within the Hebrew Bible let us know exactly how the word is to be sung. And then the third reason that we have accent markings within the text is to indicate punctuation. All right, so reason one, tone syllable. Number two, proper chanting. And number three, punctuation. All right, so we're talking about, when we talk about stress or we talk about accent, we're talking about the tone syllable. Now, most words in Hebrew, notice that I'm careful to not be declarative in some of these points, because later you will encounter certain exceptions to the rule. But don't be so judgmental. You know, in English, we have plenty of this exception. Here's a good one for you. In English, I before E, except after C, or when sounded as A, as in neighbor and way. God only knows when I learned that, but it is stuck in my head, right? So there are rules and there are exceptions to rules. In an introductory course, you're going to be, if the teacher is worth his salt or her salt, you're going to be introduced primarily and initially to the rules. We'll talk about exceptions later, right? So most Hebrew words are accented on the last syllable. So this is one example of a Hebrew accent, okay? And notice that it simply looks like an arrow, all right? So if you notice this particular accent, I'm not going to get into necessarily names and so forth of accents yet. We'll get into this later. But I want you to be able to recognize it and identify it in the Hebrew Bible. Sometimes it looks like this. At other times, it won't appear like this, but it will appear like this. Okay? So, but either of these is an example of what an accent indicating the tone syllable, the syllable upon which stress is applied when pronouncing. Okay, so we have Adam, not Adam. You put the stress on the last syllable. And again, this is as most Hebrew words are stressed. It's called the tone syllable. In some grammar books, it will tell you that this syllable upon which stress is applied is called the tonic, the one upon which tone is indicated, right? It's also in some places, in some text, referred to as milra, which literally means from below, meaning the last syllable. Okay, so you just might see that. Most Hebrew words are stressed on the last syllable. Now, here's something to let you know. Because this is normally the case, it's not indicated in the text. Okay? In other words, if you don't see this indication on a word, don't be alarmed and say, oh, I don't know where to apply the stress. Or to place the indication of stress because it's not showing in the text. If it's not showing, that indicates to you that it is stressed on that last syllable. All right. Now, by the way, this particular indicator, this accent mark, is called the munach. In our example of the word Adam, generally, when you see it in the text, you won't see the indication of the accent mark. You just won't see it, just because, why? It's on the last syllable. And that's the case for all of these. Now, I do want to tell you that the accent mark is indicated in the text when the stress is placed on a syllable other than the final. Okay? So, we want to make sure, let me see when I pull that example in. I think I'll do that in a few moments. Now, here are a few rules that you can write down, or you can follow along in the video, and you can watch the video a few times and hear these rules. A vowel in an open, all right, let me space these out again. This is our word Adam. A vowel in an open, unaccented syllable is long. Okay? Now, this is the part that people struggle with, but stay with me because it will make sense. So if you look at your chart, you indicate this is, by the way, an open syllable. Remember, because it's got a consonant and a vowel. This is a closed consonant, vowel, consonant. This is open and it's unaccented. Right? Because if it were accented, you would have an accent mark. Why? Because normally the accent comes on the second syllable, but if it's not indicated, on the last syllable, but if it's not indicated, it tells you it's on the last, so this is open and unaccented. Now try to read that in a book and get it in your head. See, it's a little bit strange. But if you notice, what vowel is this? And I want everyone to look at their chart. You don't have to answer out loud, but look at your chart and say, what is this? Now, I know sometimes you might go, oh man, there's another one that looks like it. Now, this was a question on the introductory Facebook page. People said, how do I know? Is it the long vowel of chametz, or is it the short vowel, right, that's listed down. If you go all the way down, about 10 spaces, you'll see a vowel called kametz hatuf. And it looks just the same. So you go, oh man, is it pronounced as an A-class vowel or an O-class vowel? All right, so we're going to actually touch on that, just touch on it, and then you'll see more and more examples of this, and you'll be able to tell, because now you'll be able to recognize the indicator of stress. I'll talk about that in just a moment. If a vowel is in a closed, unaccented syllable, it must be short. Closed, unaccented syllables must be a short vowel. Now notice we have the same symbol for a long A and a short O. So let's talk about that while looking at this word. Adam, this is a closed syllable. It is accented, right? Because you would see this, except that's the rule. If a word doesn't have this, you're not going to see it because it generally will occur, stress will occur on the last syllable. So it is accented, it is stressed, this is the tone syllable, and it has this sign. If it's the vowel is in a closed, unaccented syllable, it's short, right? Okay. Now, if it's closed and unaccented, but that's accented, so what does this make this? It's going to be the ah, right? So it's dam and not an O-class vowel. It'll make more sense as we work through, but this is just one example. Now, so this is the comments. Now, if you look down, you see what I'm talking about? You have the A-class and the O-class. Now, this is why it's important to know the short versus long. All right, now, what I want to do is I want to change my words up, and I want to give another example for our class tonight where we see the stress placed on a different syllable, so that you will have seen both of these. Now this word that I will be putting on the board is a word that occurs in, give me 1 second to change out my props. Remember, most words begin or have the stress on the final syllable. Now we're going to give a different example. Okay? And I will put these back up so that I don't confuse myself and I can find the letters when I need them again. I hope you understand that. Okay. Now, this particular word is the word eretz. Eretz. This word is found many, many times in the Hebrew Bible, and it's translated as land. It's also translated as earth. Now, if you notice, this is just an interesting point. In Hebrew, if I were going to transliterate this, give English spelling to what I see here, it's generally represented as E-R-E-T-Z, or sometimes S. This is a ts. So you have eretz, eretz. This is represented in English, transliterated generally as eretz, okay? Now, what I wanted to show you is that this particular word is stressed not on the final syllable. I'm going to create a little space here so we can separate the two syllables. Syllable 1 is open, right? It's open and it's accented. So in the Hebrew Bible, if you saw the word eretz, for instance, this is the way it would look. If the stress would be on the second syllable, you wouldn't need to show the indicator.
And how would you pronounce it?
Eretz. Eretz.
But if it was on the second syllable?
Probably a little more stress. It's just, it would be a fine indicator though. But notice that this is on the syllable before the last. So here's the last syllable. This is the one before the last. Again, grammar books give all sorts of different designations. Sometimes they'll call this the tonic syllable, the final syllable. Sometimes they call it milra. This would be pretonic. Why? Because it's before the tone syllable, so it's pre. So sometimes you'll see this syllable before the final syllable called pretonic. Sometimes you'll see it called milel. Milel. A bunch of different words. I don't want to get hung up on that. I just mention it in case you're working. Let's do it this way. Final syllable, syllable before the final. It's not the final. Okay, but in this particular case, we have an open syllable with the accent on the open syllable. Now, the first syllable is open and accented. I just want you to start hearing and thinking about these terms because as we build on them, it will be more important as we work our way through. The second syllable is it open or closed? I want you to look at that. Remember, an open syllable has consonant vowel. A closed syllable has consonant, vowel, consonant. So the second syllable is a closed syllable and it's unaccented. In this case, you'll see, if you look at your chart, this is the segol, right? So if you look at your chart, the segol is a short vowel. Okay? I just want you to kind of start getting used to working through the mechanics of this, okay? Just so you kind of get an idea. Again, this is introduction and beginner's biblical Hebrew. Let me give you, if you were to jump into some of the more complicated grammars, or if you look at what's called the BHS, It's Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia is a name of a text produced by German scholarship, and it is the academic version of the Hebrew Bible. Let me tell you about the number of accents that they have, the markings and the notations within the text. In BHS, which is short for Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia, which is a lot easier to say BHS, right? I'm giving you a break. In the BHS text, there are 27 prose accents, and there are 21 poetic type accents. So what is that? 48 different markings. And the latter, the 21 poetic, are primarily in the Psalms, in the book of Job, and in the book of Proverbs. We're not introducing you to all of those at this point. We're just simply showing you the basic ideas. So in this particular case, if you see, generally, if you're reading or you're looking at a word in the Hebrew Bible and you see this stress mark here, it's going to be an indicator that it's not on the final syllable. Otherwise, if you don't see it, as we saw in Adam, the stress was on that last syllable, as is usually the case. Okay. Now, and I'm not going to cover a ton tonight because some of the things that I am covering, I realize, are a little bit more difficult to grasp. Okay. Now what I want to do is I want to talk to you a little bit about the use of accent marks as punctuation. Now, some of you might have heard the phrase rightly dividing the word. Now, I'm not going to use that in its original context, but what I do want to tell you is that there are certain markings, certain accents that were placed in the biblical text, which in a way indicate that at the time that the text, that these accent marks were added, that this is the way it was understood to divide a verse into its constituent parts. Okay? So not only are verses indicated in our English Bibles and even in Hebrew Bibles now, other than scrolls obviously, are indicated by verse numbers, and you have a beginning and an ending of the verse. But in the Hebrew, these certain markings indicate the middle of the verse and the end of the verse. So you know how to logically break that verse down, and that's what I call rightly dividing the word. It's not necessarily at the halfway point, but it's indicated by context. So in a modern Hebrew Bible, these markings are indicating the way that the ancients would have passed down proper division of the verse. In other words, it's not necessarily right in the middle. Context determines, okay? There are two major what we call disjunctive, which is a fancy word for separating or dividing, disjunctive accents, okay? Now, I want to talk to you about those, and I want to show you a couple of examples, and I will use for my illustration the first verse of the Bible. So I want to get you into the Hebrew Bible. So if you have a Hebrew text, you can follow along. If you don't, I'll post a picture of this on the website later so that you can look at it. There are some websites. What's that website, Blue Letter Bible, where you can go... Interlinear Bible. So there are some that you could go to right now if you wanted to, if you didn't lose me here. Hopefully you won't. But I want to begin just to make sure that you understand what we're talking about. The two that I want to focus on are called the Tanakh, which indicates, it marks the middle or the end of the first half. So the word under which the Tanakh appears, which looks in many texts like this symbol here. Now, I'm just putting it here to show it to you, so don't think of it as placement. It will sometimes appear similar to our munach, as I demonstrated earlier for accent. Sometimes it looks more like a wishbone. So it will sometimes look more like this, but if you see this underneath a word in a sentence or in a verse, this is going to indicate, the Tanakh is going to indicate the middle, the word which ends the first half. Notice I put quotations. Don't count words. The first part of the verse. This will be indicating, if it occurs under a word in a Hebrew sentence or a verse, it will indicate that that's the last word in the first part of the verse. It makes sense in just a moment. The other mark that I want to introduce you to, and I'm going to open up to Genesis 1:1 so that I've got it before me and I can talk sensibly about this. The other mark that I'd like to talk about is going to appear, it's going to look just like this, a vertical line. It won't be red. This is not the red letter edition we're talking about here. Red is because my friend Kevin knew that it would stand out. You'll see these in a word in just a moment. But this word, this particular accent mark is called a syllable, and it indicates it's going to appear under the last word of the verse. All right, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So in Hebrew, Genesis 1:1 says, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. All right, now, I'm going to move some of these things off because my board, as big and beautiful as it is not big enough to do the illustrations that I need to do. Let me move this down because I think I will be able to use this. Let me make sure I can still see on the board. Bear with me as I change a couple of things up. And there are a couple of words that I want to point out just to make the point that I've just covered. And Kevin saw me demonstrating something last week, and he said, oh, you need that. So he made me a small, and think about it. You look at your vowel chart what does this indicate? This single dot here. We talked about it last week. And you will know that, I am certain. So cholim, okay. And a final mem. Okay. Now, in this particular example, what I want to do is I want to show you, if you were to look up in your Hebrew Bible, you would see underneath this word, Elohim, right? What is, let me make this right here. Put a Hirik Yod, Elohim, and you won't know this yet, but I'm going to go ahead and put this, because that's part of our class tonight as well. Okay. Yeah, all right. See, we introduced. Now, in the Hebrew Bible, it says, Bereshit bara Elohim. Literally, now we're not getting into syntax and word order and so forth yet, but in the Hebrew Bible, in Hebrew syntax, Bereshit means in beginning or in getting started. Bara, he created, and then Elohim. But the order of the words are not to be understood that he, an imaginative he, created Elohim. It actually means Bereshit, in beginning, Elohim, he created. Okay? In beginning, Elohim created. That's why most translations try to fix that for you in English to indicate what the Hebrew is trying to say. But in a Hebrew Bible, when you see the word Elohim, what you will also see is my particular, let me find, just like, it's going to look like this. So you will see the Tanakh under Elohim. So it would say Bereshit bara Elohim. And then you see this marking which indicates that that is the end of the first part of the verse. Okay? Right? It's like part one is in beginning, Elohim created. And then there's this mark. It doesn't mean you have to take an extra long pause or anything, but it indicates the constituent parts of the sentence. And I'm just introducing this topic to you so that you understand what we are doing. Now, I'm going to leave this here because there are other points to make with this example. Now, you can see, by the way, that as we work through this and we build, we are going to get more into some of these concepts. It gets a little bit more difficult as we go, but not too bad. And I love, by the way, that people are posting other teaching aids on our Facebook group page because it helps people as they are trying to learn. Let me put some of these vowel points back so that we can make new points. And I want to make sure that I do this accurately according to the text. You make sure that that's still visible, and it is. Now you can begin to think about some of these breakdowns in terms of how many syllables and whether it's opened or closed. You can begin to count vowels because the number of vowels indicates the number of syllables. Remember, every syllable has to have a consonant and a vowel. Some have consonant, vowel, consonant, but you can count the vowels basically and determine what you're dealing with in terms of number of syllables. Now I'm adding another mark that you have only been introduced to tonight, and this is our seluk. This would be the final word in verse 1, Genesis 1. Okay? It says, remember the first part of the verse says, Bereshit bara Elohim, and then we have the Tanakh. It indicates the end of the first part. And then the latter part says, Et hashemayim ve'et haaretz. Now, notice this marking next to my vowel sound. See this vertical mark? Mm-hmm. That's the seluk, and it indicates the final word in that second part of the verse. Now, when I first started studying Hebrew, and I would read through things like this, I would say, I don't need to know all that. All I want to know is, how do you pronounce the word? I just want to get in and read it. And what I found as I got further along is that I missed valuable points. So there is a reason that these are covered in most grammars early on, because you will need some of these, at least the basic understanding of them as you progress. All right, now, what I want to do is, this particular marking in haaretz, okay, the seluk, notice it appears in the final word of the verse on the accented or the tone syllable. So what does this tell you? This tells you not only, because it has this gives us a couple of pieces of information. It tells me that this is the final word in that sentence or that verse, but it also occurs on the syllable which gets the stress. All right? So, now the verse will end in the Hebrew Bible with what's called a sof pasuk, the end of the passage, the end of the verse. It looks similar to a colon, not too dissimilar to that. Most of them are stylized as this one is, as Kevin made for me. So this, again, the Tanakh occurs at the end of the first part of the verse, and then this will occur in the last word on the syllable which receives the stress. Now, The aleph, if you remember, we used this example, eretz, earlier, and we noticed that when it was spelled, I added something here. Notice I put a hey on it, but before it just said aleph, resh, final tzadeh, and it had two segols. But, all right, now if you noticed, it's in an open accented syllable because this has got a consonant and a vowel, but it's open. How do I know that that's open? I mean, I know how I know it's open. How do I know that it's accented? Because, right, what's the rule? You would know normally if it's indicated on the text, but this is the rule, all right? So this vowel is changed. It would have been a segol if it's just eretz, but in this form, and we're not going to get into lengthening vowels yet at this point, but just understand. So you have an open syllable, and a closed syllable, right? Now, just a little bit. Now, what is this? In Hebrew, we already demonstrated that this was a word. Eretz means land. Sometimes it's translated earth. If I put ha on the beginning of a word, this is an indicator of the definite article. So it's translated the. So when we work through this verse, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and that's the end of the verse. We know it's the end of the verse because we have a few clues. In English Bibles, we have the numbers, and in most Hebrew Bibles. But there's another way. We have sof pasuk, it tells us it's the end of the verse. We know that this is the last word because in this word, in the final word, we have this symbol called a saluk. All right. Now, okay. So, let me take some of this down just so that we clear a little bit of room so that I can make a couple of other examples. And there are so many examples that we could use, but I'm only trying to present that which is necessary at this point. One of the grammars that I have says that one of the problems that most grammars have is that they try to cover everything instead of focusing only on those things which are necessary at any given point. And you can get too deep too quickly. It's like exercise. You can get into too much exercise too quickly, and you find yourself in a good bit of trouble, right? All right. Now, one of the things that I'd like to show you is, because it also occurs in the first verse of the Bible, it occurs so many times in Hebrew Scriptures, but some people have gotten a little bit crazy with this in interpretation, and I just want to talk through it because it's in the same verse. What you'll see twice in this particular verse is this word, eight. It says, Bereshit bara Elohim et Hashemayim va'et haaretz. This word, notice when I said va'et, that's and, va indicates and, but this word, when you see it, and it occurs thousands of times in the Hebrew Bible, it indicates, it's called the sign of the direct object. The sign of the direct object. Now, here's something else. I'm just going to throw a few things in there. I didn't pay attention when I was in high school in grammar. And so what I discovered was years later, because I remember thinking, I'll never use it. Who cares what a direct object is? And then I wanted to learn biblical Hebrew. And I said, oh man, here I am again. I'm an older man. Now I have to pay attention. A direct object, for those who don't know, most of you probably were excellent students in school and you know this already, but a direct object is a word representing a person or thing upon which the action of a verb is performed. All right? It's a word representing a person or a thing upon which the action of a verb is performed. If you remember in the first part of our verse, it says, in beginning, Elohim created. Created what? Et hashamayim v'et haaretz. The skies and the land. All right? So et occurs before. In our verse, it occurs before the heavens and before the earth. So it's indicating that the object of the creating is heavens and earth. All right? See, this is way more grammar than a lot of people ever thought they would need, but it's very basic. All right? But you'll see the sign of the direct object. An object, a direct object, can be definite or indefinite. In other words, it doesn't have to be something specific. It can be indefinite. If it's definite, like the heavens and the earth, you will generally see the sign of the direct object. You will generally see this. So this et occurs thousands of times in the Hebrew Bible. Now, what was I indicating earlier? There is a group of people, and believe me, I'm not into theology in this class. I don't care what your beliefs are personally, but I have seen this so many times, I have to tell you something. There is this idea, in the Hebrew Bible, it talks about Hashem, the Lord, capital L-O-R-D, which is the Tetragrammaton. It says that He is the first and the last. The book of Revelations uses this same phrase. There are a group of theologians who want to make the Messiah the first and the last. In the Greek of Revelation, it talks about the Alpha and the Omega. So what do some of these people do? The Alpha and the Omega are the beginning and the end. The first letter and the last letter of the Greek alphabet. That's all Greek to me. I'm talking Hebrew. So what they do is they say, well, if this one is the Alpha and the Omega, they're the Aleph and the Tav. And so what they do then is they begin to look for this in the Hebrew Bible to say everywhere this occurs, it's an indicator of the Messiah. I've seen this. But grammatically, that's a no-go. I'm just telling you. Don't try to put someone in this word because you'll be surprised where all it occurs, and you don't want this person, if it's who you think it is, you don't want them everywhere this occurs. It's a simple grammatical device that indicates the direct object follows it. Does that make sense? Is that okay? Okay. Now, in the last class, take this down, put my letters up. I'll get better at this as I go, I promise you. One of the things that I want to show you, I just want to point this out. This particular, let's see how to put it before I introduce it. This is a hurried vowel, if you will. We're going to talk about this a little bit. It occurs under the Aleph in Elohim in our example. I'm going to put this over here because we're going to go through some examples here and you'll understand in a moment why. Clear some of this off so that we're ready for our next example. If you recall, in last week's class, we began talking about half vowels, and I started that by introducing you to a Shiva. Everyone remember that? The Shiva. In fact, we were very specific and we talked about the silent or the simple vocal Shiva. The simple vocal Shiva. And here is that symbol. Remember it? Looks like a colon. Now, we talked about this and we said that the simple Shiva is like a modern colon, that it's used at the beginning of a word, or it can appear at the beginning of a syllable within a word, the Shiva. That when it appears and when it is vocal, which we'll learn more rules around that, it makes a quick, hurried sound. So for instance, the examples I gave last week were the Hebrew word berit, which is the word for covenant, and it's such a hurried, like in English we would say banana. It's that B sound. You don't say banana. Well, I guess some people could, but you're not supposed to. You're supposed to say banana. All right? But in the Hebrew word berit, or in the Hebrew word pri, as in fruit, like pri hagafen, the fruit of the vine, it's a hurried sound. And I also told you that this only occurs, you can only have the Shiva under non-gutturals. Non-gutturals. So what does that mean? We're going to put the gutturals up here so that we can make a different point tonight. So that we can demonstrate what I'm talking about here. Now, sometimes resh is a guttural, but I want to use these for my example. You have the aleph, the hey, the het, and the ayin. Okay? These are called gutturals, and they take certain characteristics because of their special pronunciation and so forth. So here's what I meant last week when I said that Shiva occurs under non-gutturals. What I'm telling you is that you won't see this. Why? Because that's a guttural. You won't see this. You won't see this. Right? So under the gutturals, what do we do? Under the gutturals, we have something else. What we're going to have is when a vocal Shiva appears under a guttural, it's combined with one of three short vowels. Now, look at your chart. Look at your chart, and I just want you to look at these three. Okay? What is the short vowel here? Notice on your chart, it's patak. It's the A sound, an A-class Hebrew vowel sound, but it's the short A-class vowel sound. Now look down at the E-class vowel, and you'll see the segol. It's a short, right? And then if you look at down in the O-class vowels, you'll see chametz chatuf. This is the short O sound. The indicator there that I have is as in cost, okay? Now, so what this is telling us is that underneath the gutturals, rather than finding a Shiva, you have to combine it with one of these short vowels to give it what's needed in order to pronounce it. And so if I put this particular, if I put my Shiva with this vowel, okay, which is the patak, look what I get. We get this vowel, okay? Now, it's a hurried sound, but it's the sound that this short vowel makes, okay? So if I put the shava with the segol, this is what I get. It makes basically the same sound, but it's hurried, if you will. And the same thing goes for the kametz hatuf. Now, each of these are producing a hurried sound. You'll see these underneath the guttural letters. Remember before I told you that you'll see a shava under non-gutturals, but under gutturals, this is what you see. I just want to introduce this to you. They're called chatef, which means hurried or snatched. It's like a hurried up sound. Like you just get it over with, get it out there, right? A couple of examples. We had Elohim up on the board, right, earlier, and you saw that it began in this example in Genesis 1. You'll see this segol. You'll see that under Elohim. Elohim. All right. Now, let's see. I'll use one with the patak. Let's see. A good word. Let me move this. Move this. Move this. And let's see. 1 second. This will give you an example. And I hope these examples help you. I'm trying to pick words, a couple of things I'm trying to do. I'm trying to pick words that you're going to see frequently and not rare words. I'm also using words that occur early in Genesis because the goal would be to inspire you to jump into Genesis and begin to look at some of these things. Because actually, once you get the basics down, there's nothing that should stop you from wanting to jump right in. Now, we're closing in on the end of my class, but I want to take just a couple of moments and give you a couple of these examples. All right, so we take our, this is basically the shava combined with a, what's this vowel, right? Look at your chart, a patak, okay. So this is going to be a hurried sound, but it's going to be ah, okay? All right, now if I take, let's see how many of my vowels I have spread out here. And I'll give you another, we'll go ahead and vocalize this word. And make sure that I spell it right. I spelled one wrong last week and people laughed at me and made fun of me. And so, okay. Now, this particular word is, can you sound this out? Keep going. Adama. Adama. Okay. Right? So you got Adama. Okay. And this particular word means ground. Now, if you remember in Hebrew, when we say Adam, we started our class with Adam. Adam is translated either Adam or Adam, the man, or it's either translated as a personal name or as the word for humanity in general. Adam, you know, man, like man, general. But Adam is called Adam. He's brought forth from the Adamah. So what you begin to see in Hebrew is words are connected by root. Adam comes from the Adamah, and it begins to give us insight into what these words mean, and you can get into all sorts of things about how humanity is connected to the ground. You know, a lot of people like to live in heaven, like they're, what do they say, so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good. Well, the idea is that you are very much a part of the ground. And we ought to be serving the ground, which is what man was created for, right? There was no man to serve the Adamah. There's no man. So Adam is made to serve the ground. Now, I'll give you another example here, just to show you how we employ these hurried vowels, if you will. And I want to put this other example up for you so that you can see it, and we should be closing in on the end of the class. So let me see the example that I picked out, and this will give you one example of each. I showed you this Adamah is using one of our vowels, and now we're going to use the final vowel that is an example of this. I can get them. Okay. Get these balanced correctly. Now, remember, we talked about how is this particular letter pronounced, okay? In this example, this is a short sound, so it would technically be oni. So here it represents the O sound, the O class, and oni means affliction, okay? But this is an example of the hurried, and what is this vowel indicated here? It's comments, right? So this is the vowel sound that we're talking about here. So we covered a lot of material tonight. I'm glad that that we finally figured out that we had not clicked the start button, and that's what was holding us up. But I wanted to make sure that I covered a good bit. So if you think back through, we covered some of the points we touched on in previous lessons, but a lot of this material was new. But I want you to think about these things. If you have to watch the video again, that's okay, because next week we'll be going a little bit further with these ideas. We'll be talking again about some of these things that we've covered in lessons 1 through 3. So some of the newer points that we covered tonight, don't be so confused by them, because technically, if you learned what we did in the previous classes, most of this is not going to be totally new, but rather building on what we covered in previous lessons. So I want people to not be so confused. In other words, you already knew these vowel sounds and what they represent when they're in full vowels. And so whenever we add a shiva, we understand that it's the same basic point, but these occur under the gutturals and not under the non-guttural letters. So that's enough for one night. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time and your patience, and look forward to being here with you again next week. So shalom, study, don't give up, And we'll be tying some things together in next week's class so that I feel like we've sort of put a bow on it and we've tied it up to the point where you can begin to read for yourself the words of the Hebrew Bible. Now, I will tell you this at this point, at the end of Lesson 4, that I've already begun to work on further classes to take us to the next level in Biblical Hebrew. So until next time, shalom, shalom.